If you are tired of seeing the Cooler Master and our 200 builds everywhere, this will be the new replacement, the SSUPD Meshlicious. SSUPD finally listened to what people wanted and released the full mesh case in this batch. Unlike other premium cases like the NCase M1, the Ghost S1, or even the NZXT H1, I had no problem with buying this case, and I received the package within just 3 business days with UPS shipping. This batch ran for an entire week, so there was zero stock issue, which was surprisingly good. If you could not buy it this time, you can wait for the next run and don't have to fight orders to get one. And now, let's check this case out.
What's up?
My first impression was, wow, this case is big. But you need to excuse me because this is the second case that I own which has volume more than 10 liters besides the Cougar QBX. Here are some quick comparisons between the Meshlicious and other cases. On the first glance, the mesh and the Cougar QBX feel similar in size. If laid horizontally, they both have the same length, but the width of the mesh is significantly shorter. Next are cases that have volume less than 10 liters which I have featured on the channel. Case by case design MI6, the XZMod XQ69, aka the Chinese Sentry 2, and the K39. CPU temperature in the 3 cases are okay, but not impressive, so I expect to get greater temperature improvement with the mesh. There are 4 removable mesh panels, front, top, and 2 sides. By using push pins on these panels, accessing the internal components is completely tooless and effortless. When I remove a side panel, there was one screw drop out of the case and I am unsure where it came from. Inside the case, the box with all the accessories can be found. Everything plus a multi-language instruction is neatly packed. However, I was a bit disappointed with it as they could have separated the screws like the MI6 case, which make it easier and safer to store these tiny screws than just putting them in Ziplocs. It won't be a small form factor build without any problem, and have 2 main concerns about this case. First is the USB-C port of the front I/O. I know that many of you are using B450 or X470 boards which don't have a USB-C header. So, the solution to make both front I/O USB ports usable is buying a USB 3 splitter. You can grab one on Mod DIY for $20 or on eBay for a cheaper price. Both will be shipped from China, but from my experience, Mod DIY always deliver within a week. Then, you can grab a USB 3 male to USB-C female adapter from LinkUp on Amazon. With these two, the front I/O can fully be used. However, I will grab myself an Asus Strix B550i motherboard which has a USB-C header. Fun fact, this is probably the first and the last AM4 ITX motherboard from Asus that has a USB-C header. The second problem is connecting the monitor to the GPU. Due to the design, to plug the cables to the GPU, I need to route and insert them at the bottom of the case. However, the GPU's position is too close to the ground, so it's very difficult to do it. SSUPD mentioned that if the GPU is shorter than 320mm, you can move the GPU up from the default position by repositioning the riser and the metal bar. This only moves the GPU up by about 1 cm and does not really help because my DisplayPort cable is very huge. I will talk more about this at the end of the video because this is an annoying issue. But time to do some slight modification to the case. First, we need to remove the stock adhesive rubber feet. I will stick them on a food wrapper in case I need to reuse them in the future. Doubt. To clean the sticky adhesive on the case, we use Glue Gun to carefully clean them. There are 4 rubber hard drive vibration absorbers at the bottom of the case. We need to take one off, and trust me, 3 are enough to secure a 2.5-inch drive. These HiFi feet were used to replace the stock feet of my Cougar QBX case. The diameter is 40mm and height is 20mm, and I used them to help improve the GPU temperature, but it's time to take them back.
Yoink!
To mount the feet, we need 4 M3 screws, and I found that the screws on my Noctua NHL9A cooler were just perfect. I am currently using its fan, so I think it makes perfect sense to take its screws too. Yoink! In case you are wondering, the length of the screw is about 14mm. With that length, here is how it looked like when I inserted the screw to the HiFi foot. Removing the stock rubber feet reveals 8 mounting holes. We will use the 4 inner holes to install the new feet. I worried that the black feet and the white case would be a terrible match, but it turned out to be good. And installing the side panel also hides the feet more under the shadow and makes it stealthier. I think the black HiFi feet can work great with both black and white case. However, it is still just my opinion, so let me know what you guys think. Here is how the screws look like inside. Perfect length. Next are some preparations. These steps are completely optional, but I want to make this video more inclusive for everyone, and they also help a bit with cable management and GPU temperature, so why not? The default configuration lets us install a 3-slot graphic card. By moving the motherboard tray and the I/O cover of the case, we can install a 4-slot GPU, which is pretty impressive. To remove the motherboard tray, there are a few screws that need removing. First are the 2 screws holding the offset bar. One screw that is located above the PCIe slot cover. On the back, unscrew these 2 flathead screws. And finally, one more screw at the bottom of the case. Be careful not to drop the motherboard tray once you completely take these screws off. With the motherboard tray is out, we can take a look at the standoffs used for mounting the PCI riser. They are very short, so once the GPU is installed, the card will stay close to the back of the motherboard. This is not great when we have flow-through cooling GPU, especially the RTX 3000 Founder Edition. This box of standoffs can be purchased on Amazon and it comes with different sizes. I combined a 20mm female with a 5mm male and a nut to replace the stock motherboard standoffs. These are secured by M3 screws and they have perfect height for installing the motherboard. Besides extending the gap between the back of the motherboard and GPU to help with GPU temperature, doing this can also let me install the M.2 heatsink. As you can see, the stock standoffs are very short. If you don't want to try the standoff mod, I highly recommend wrapping some thick thermal pads for the rear M.2 SSD so that you can use the motherboard tray as a heatsink. And while taking the motherboard tray out, I also install my SSD to this position. However, installing the SSD here requires removing this screw, which is used to hold the SFX power supply mount. Luckily, the SSD itself pushes against the mount and keeps it in place. Install the motherboard tray back to the stock 3-slot configuration and we finish the optional preparations. It's time to build a PC. First thing everyone must do in any PC build is opening the motherboard box and find the most forgettable accessory, the I/O shield, aka the brace. This brace will go to the back of the computer and make sure that you really hammered it in. Next thing for me to do is moving my 2 NVMe drives and the CPU from the Strix X470i to my new motherboard. The Strix B550i has lots of plastic, so it feels lighter and way cheaper than the Strix X470i. Plus, it does not have any RGB and that makes me feel a bit regretful. This is my 4th Strix ITX board and honestly, it is the saddest looking one. I really hope that it can trade its look for an equal or better performance than my previous board, which has served me well since the end of 2018. Before installing the motherboard, I plugged the CPU power cable first because it's a bit difficult to insert after. The cable is also routed behind the motherboard. The riser can now be inserted into the PCI slot. This adhesive rubber PSU stand can be found in the accessories box. I don't know if it is done on purpose or not, but the adhesive tape only covers half of my stand. Why? Anyway, I stick it here so that it can help support the power supply. Hopefully, the little tape can keep the stand from moving. I added the mechanical drive under the power supply. There's one more space for a third 2.5-inch drive if you need extra storage. The next step is slotting in the GPU. The Asus TUF RTX 3090 is a 2.5 slot card and its length is 300mm. A thumb screw is used to secure the card here and two small screws lock it right here. These screws can only be accessed from the front of the case. If I want to take the GPU out in the future, I will need to take the AIO's radiator out of the case to remove the two screws. The PCI-E power cables are also pre-installed and routed behind the motherboard. The Corsair SF750 power supply can be secured to the case and the cables can also be plugged in. Unfortunately, my 24-pin cable is too short, so I could not route it behind the motherboard, which could have made cable management much cleaner. The AIO that I will put in is the Cooler Master ML240 Illusion, which has caught my eyes recently because the opaque pump block is just so beautiful. The fans were installed in exhausting configuration, which means they will pull hot air generated by the GPU out of the case. I also installed two fan grills to prevent any cables from touching the fan blades. Having the radiator mounted close to the mesh panel gives us more space to route the long tubes and keeps the radiator fittings from interfering with tall GPUs. If you also use a 240mm water cooler, make sure to lower the bracket from its original position because the radiator is blocked by the front I/O. After mounting the water cooler, I secured the block to the CPU. The tubes were a bit long, so I tied them to the CPU power cable so that they wouldn't push out. To install the two front USB cables, you will need to train them first. They are very stiff, so make sure to bend them to the shape you want before plugging into the ports. I tucked the rest of the two cables to the gap between the board and the fan grill. Last step is installing the memory. The two sticks of white Corsair Dominator RAM are the perfect match for this build. After that, the side panel can be safely closed and we finally finished the build. Is it though? What makes this AIO beautiful is also causing trouble. The pump block is just too tall. Even though I could install the mesh panel while laid horizontally, once it stood up, pushing here would pop the panel out at the other side. The weak points are the two push pins as the water block are closer to them. If I can find a way to strengthen, then the panel won't pop out easily. Luckily, everything in this case, even the mesh panels, is fully made of vibranium, steel, meaning any magnet will attach to them. With some rare earth magnets that I bought from my Soviet K39 build, I stick them to the frame of the case. Voila, it worked, and I could still continue with this AIO instead of finding a replacement. You can put these around the case to make the panel more magnetic. Just be sure to keep away from hard drives. The circular magnet will be used temporarily as I will grab the rectangular ones so that they can fully be hidden behind the frame. And that's it. The build is finally done and I am satisfied with how this turned out. I wish my 24-pin and PCIe power cables were longer so that I could manage them better. The Cooler Master ML240 Illusion is also very simple to install. The fans, pump, and RGB lighting are all controlled by the motherboard without the need of using the included hub. Speaking about the board, by switching from the Strix X470 to this, I could lower the voltage used to keep the Ryzen 7 3700X at 4 GHz. By combining Prime 95 with a VLP ECC memory, I found out that my chip only required 1.14 volts instead of 1.22 volts to be stable. This can greatly reduce the CPU temperature for my future ITX builds. The new feed of the case let me route the display cable in 5 different ways, from the front, left, right, bottom, and through its back hole. With a thick DP cable like this, I could still insert it into my GPU. That's what he said. So if your GPU is not too long, spending money on a questionable quality DisplayPort cable is not necessary. Here are some quick sound and temperature tests. I used fan control software to control the speed of the CPU and GPU fans. With Cyberpunk 2077, it does not look very good for the GPU temperature and clock speed. The two fans of the radiator are set as exhaust to help with the GPU temperature, but the CPU temperature was not hot, so the fans didn't spin fast enough to pull out the heat from the graphic card, which caused high temperature and lower clock speed on the RTX 3090. To fix it, I created a separated fan curve based on the GPU temperature. With a few clicks, I set the two CPU fans to run according to the GPU temperature. The software makes it very easy to switch between multiple fans profiles. There are some cons that I want to talk about. First is the printed instruction. With this folding like this and without any step number, my brain initially read it from the top to the bottom, but the correct way is to read from the left to right. Look how Cooler Master made the instruction for the AIO. It is also folded, but it is very clear for new users to understand thanks to the proper step numbers. I suggest you skip this and open the online manual, which is easier to read. The instruction has so many text, but I could only understand less than half, but it still manages to be lackluster. According to the instruction, you can rotate the SFX PSU mounting bracket 180 degrees to install the power supply to the higher position, which can help if your PSU cables are too short to reach the motherboard. However, if you do that, you will not be able to install the motherboard tray in 4-slot configuration. It also never mentions that installing the SSD behind the PSU in 4-slot mode is not possible. I had to take the motherboard tray in and out of the case many times due to the missing information, and this is very time consuming. Instruction has lots of text, but not very helpful. The second issue is the PCI-E riser. The length is only 14 cm, so it is too short. I saw many people replacing their riser, which gives them more space for routing and hiding cables, and there is no issue with that. This case can also support mounting a short GPU, but you need to spend money on an extra riser because the included one is too short. Why don't they give us one with a proper length so that it can be used in both configurations? And the last issue is the feet. I have built many cases and I can say there is a case which is easy or hard to build, but this is the first that is hard to use. If I can rate it based on usability, I would give it a 1 out of 10. I would have given it a 0 if the 90-degree angle HDMI cable is not included. My main monitor can only support 144Hz via DisplayPort or DVI, which means I am stuck with 60Hz if I use HDMI cable. SSUPD's reason for not including the DP cable was the universal support of HDMI, and many motherboards don't have DisplayPort. However, they are probably the only case maker that has to include a display cable, and I am not talking about 90 degree or not. The reason we need it because there is a problem with plugging the cable into the GPU. People who use integrated GPU on their motherboard don't give a shit if there's a cable coming with a case. They have no problem plugging any cable to the board. Only people with a dedicated graphic card need assistance, and I can tell you that at least 90% of people who build in this case with a GPU will have a monitor with DisplayPort. If they want to universally support everyone, then give us the option to pay an extra $10 to choose between having an included DP or HDMI cable, as $10 is the price difference between the two on the store. Let's see how many would like to buy the case with HDMI. For me, the HDMI cable is just an e-waste cause I have no use for it. They recently cut the price for both cables by $5 on the store, but I think the HDMI cable is still overpriced AF and not worth $15. You can grab a 90-degree one from Amazon for way cheaper. But I think the case's feet need to be redesigned. The adhesive rubber feet just don't cut it. What I just mentioned still can't change the fact that this is a very good case. Even though my GPU was quite hot, I think it was still manageable with tuning on the CPU fans. If I want, I can try a bit more aggressive undervolting. I just prefer having it running above 1900 MHz. By having the GPU I/O at the bottom, this case and the NZXT H1 can provide much more optimal temperature for air-cooled GPUs than some vertical cases with the I/O at the top. I also like that the case is made of steel instead of aluminum, which is very convenient for mounting a magnetic RGB or fan controller. You can also use it to decorate the case to remind yourself or let people know who you truly are. If you're interested in grabbing the case or other accessories which I showed, please check out the links in the description. They are currently taking orders and the next batch should be shipped in July. I hope my Meshlicious and official build guide can be useful for your future build. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye bye.